Got former federal NDP leader Tom Mulcair and Scott Reid, former senior advisor to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Thanks to you both for being here. Tom, what do you make of what you're seeing today from Prime Minister Trudeau, essentially working hand in hand with Western allies across the globe to input these sanctions? Are these sanctions good enough?
Well, there's certainly a step in the right direction, Beatrice, but like all Canadians watching the horror of this barbarous invasion, I certainly wish we could be doing more. And let's hope that the Europeans finally get their act together to impose the exclusion of Russia from the SWIFT system, which allows banks to deal with each other across borders. There is, in my mind, one reason to hold back. It's always good to have an extra sanction to lay on and maybe try to change the behavior on the other side. At the same time, it's not very clear to me right now that Canada and the NATO allies are all in lockstep. So I don't think we can afford to have that sort of show that we had today. With regard to Mr. Bazan, he reminds me of the situation I felt this afternoon when I was watching Chrystia Freeland, our Deputy PM. We have 1.5 million Canadians of Ukrainian origin. We all stand with them today, but we stand with their families, with their friends in Ukraine. This is the doorstep of Europe. This is the 21st century. This isn't supposed to happen. We saw apartment buildings being bombed. If they're targeting civilians, that's a war crime. And we shouldn't be dilly-dallying around as to whether or not they get removed from the SWIFT banking exchange system. We should be throwing everything that we can at them, of course, short of going to war with them, because that would be, of course, at this stage, absolute folly. But we have to be doing everything we can.
Scott, I'm curious what you think about the timing of this particular invasion and why Mr. Putin is deciding to do this now. The two countries have, essentially been in a conflict for the past 8 years or so. There was, and you look at what happened over the last year or so, even just in the United States and the Western world. You have the fall of Afghanistan to terrorists. We all witnessed what happened on January 6th with the insurrection in the United States. And I'm wondering if you feel that Mr. Putin might feel a little bit more emboldened to do something as volatile and as drastic as this, given what's happening in the Western world. What are your thoughts on that?
Unquestionably. This is happening because he believes the West is weak. He believes that the West is weakened by 2 years of an exhausting pandemic that has, exhausted its leaders and its populations. He believes that the West is more divided than it's been in the past. Particularly when you take a look at voices on the right. You have, half of the GOP in the United States used to have been Cold War hawks, anti-Ruskies, talking out today and yesterday in favor of Mr. Putin. I think he thinks that he faces a more divided opponent in the West. I think he believes that he faces a more fatigued opponent in the West, and I think he thinks that the timing is perfect for him to test our tolerances.
And just a follow-up to that, today, we saw even the Russian stock market lost about a third of its value. At one point, it was down about 50%. I can't imagine the revolt that many Russians might even take in the next days or so. We're already seeing thousands of them take to the streets in many cities across Russia who are protesting. They don't want this war, but I'm wondering when it starts to hit them in the pocketbook, when they can't put food on the table or heat their homes, do you think that, what do you expect to see from the Russian people? And do you think that this Russian leader is just trying to hold on to power and trying to posture as much as he can with his desire to, I guess, to rebuild a USSR?
Well, it was very fortifying to see all those people putting themselves at risk by being in the streets and protesting. I think that people were probably surprised by the size and scale of the crowds. I was, and so you find that reassuring. On the other hand, I don't think that there's any question that Mr. Putin has complete control over the state apparatus, and I don't feel that he's in any position of immediate threat. And so, yeah, these sanctions, these economic sanctions, and Tom's right. You've got to take them to the next level. You've got to target more individuals, possibly even Putin himself. You've certainly got to sever them from the SWIFT system so that they really are, Russia really does become an island economically and financially. But I'm not certain that that's going to have a very immediate effect on Mr. Putin. He's been marshaling himself for this moment. He's not terribly victim to public opinion. And I think that he feels he can seize some territory. It'll start to get tight on him at home, maybe over the course of weeks, even months. And at some point, I suspect, will probably say, all right, well, let's have a conversation. But he'll want to be rewarded for his aggressions. He'll want to keep some of those territories. And I think that's going to be, the real question. We can all say we stand with the Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine. What does that mean? To what extent do we stand with them? How deep will our defense of them go? That's going to be the tricky political question for every Western leader looking across at what's happening tonight.
Tom, when you look at a former Western leader, I'm talking about former U.S. President Donald Trump, saying Putin's actions are genius when it comes to saying Donetsk, Luhansk are now independent states. You've got Mike Pompeo today penning an op-ed for Fox News saying it's not Vladimir Putin who has changed, it's the American leadership who has changed. What does something like that do to empower Russia's president and essentially put a wrench into relations between Western allies who are trying to work together to combat Putin?
Well, Donald Trump fought hard. He called it a witch hunt and a hoax when it was established that he was essentially put in power by the Russians using access to analytics that allowed them to target voters that would support that sort of program. He's showing himself now to be a dupe, to be the puppet of the Russian regime. And I think that that's a good thing, that that's finally being exposed, because he was able to hide from it for so long. Now that it's out there, front and center, that he supports these tyrants in the completely illegal aggression and invasion of a sovereign country, at least that's on the table. I'm anxious to see, because you can be sure, Beatrice, that there will be different techniques used to bring a vote before the different houses of Congress, before the House of Representatives, the Senate, to try to get people to at least pronounce themselves on this issue. And I'm anxious to see how the Republicans behave. They're so afraid of Donald Trump that they don't stand on the questions of principle that got them there in the first place. That can only go on for so long.
And Scott, just circling back to some of the economic implications of this conflict, you've got countries that are heavily reliant on Russia's energy. You look at Germany, for instance, about 60 to 70% of their oil and energy comes from that country, and they're only contributing, barely about 1% to NATO. How is that going to make things even more difficult moving forward, especially for many of these NATO members that are now heavily reliant on Russia's a very crucial resource?
Well, it's going to cause pain, and it's going to cause domestic pain for a bunch of countries. Hopefully the one reassuring fact is that the West has had time, and particularly Western powers in Europe, like Germany, they've had time to prepare for this. They knew this was coming. They've seen it. This has been at least a week's march, a number of weeks' march. And so they knew that those consequences were going to be suffered. They could see all these challenges coming. It really, I think, where your question takes us is, what does the outcome of this look like? Like, how long will it take? How aggressive will Putin be? How long will military conflict last? And what might it take to bring us cease to all this? And we don't know the answers to those questions yet. We don't know how tough it's going to get when gas starts to increase at the pump here and abroad. We don't know how tough it's going to get for Putin as sanctions start to create real hardship in his own country. I mean, and so my fear is that this is going to be at least weeks, maybe months, however. And I think, we're going to see that this unleashes a lot of pain in a lot of places.
A lot of instability ahead. Tom Mulcair, Scott Reid, thanks to you both for your time tonight.